Hello everyone. Now we'll discuss about the NCERT Class 6 History our Past 1. Under Chapter 1 we have got what, where, how and when related to the history. So there are several things we can find out related to the history where we find out about the lives of the hunters, about the farmers, there are many rulers, there are many priests, craftsmen, artists, the scientists and musicians. We also find about the different games the children played over the time and different songs which they sang. If you consider where did the people live during that time, if you consider in this map, there are various rivers we can observe. Anyhow, we'll come to the in the geography. We'll discuss about different rivers. In brief, if we look into some of the important rivers we have to consider is one is the Indus River, the Ravi, the Setluj. We have got the Mahi, we have got the Sabarmati, the Narmada River, the Godavari, the Bhima River, the Krishna, Tungabhadra over here. Some important rivers like the Krishna, the Kaveri, which is most important river for Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. We've got the Tapi River, the Chambal, the Yamuna River, or the Ganga River, which is one, and you've got the the Kosi River, got the Mahanadi, which is flowing, and we also should consider the Brahmaputra over here, and other rivers will also see in the geography class. And with respect to the classics, I am just concentrating on what the sculptures or the inscriptions, how the people were depending on the land, depending on the rivers, which only is our concentration here, not about the map. So here the people used to live along these rivers, and they are living around thousands of years ago, and they were skilled gatherers. Basically this they are going to gather the foods near the, and they know about the wealth of the plants. They used to hunt the animals and live for their own. Some of the areas where men and women they began to grow the crops. Basically they were some crops like wheat and barley were grown. Wheat and barley were grown about 8,000 years ago. 8,000 years ago. And they were located near to the rivers, and people began to rearing the animals like sheep, goat, cattle, and they were living in the villages. And the places where rice was first grown are into the north of the Vindhyas. So about 4,700 years ago, some of the earliest cities which were flourished on the banks of these rivers. So later, around 2,500 years ago, these cities were developed on the banks of the Ganga. So in the ancient times, the area along these rivers to the south of this Ganga were known as Magadha. So we need to remember the term called as Magadha. So they are lying in the state of the Bihar. So the people traveled from one part of the subcontinent to the other part, the hills. They were traveling through the high mountains, Himalayas. They are going through the rivers, and so these journey made it a little bit dangerous sometimes, and they always moved towards the livelihood. And there are some religious teachers which walk from one village to the other village. So we can also see here different parts which are located where you have got what are the rivers near the Bangladesh, what are the rivers near the Bhutan, near the Nepal, and what flows from Pakistan and the Afghanistan. We have got and some South Indian rivers are to be concentrated. And if you consider the names of the lands, we know there are two words which are often used to the our country, that is India and Bharat. So how this India came? This India came from Indus. So we have got the Indus River. So this Indus River is responsible for the name India. So this is called Sindhu in Sanskrit. So we call this Indus. It's called Sindhu in Sanskrit. So if you consider the Iranians and the Greeks who came uh, through the northwest about 2500 years ago, they were familiar with this Indus. And they to the since it is a land to the east of this river, they call it as India. They call it as India. And there were several ways of finding out about the past. You know, some one way is by knowing about the palm leaf, what they used for writing. So those writing we call it as manuscript. So manuscript, this was written about some thousands of years ago, and basically these palm leaves were cut into pages and they were tied together to make the books. So there are several ways of finding about the past. So we'll find by reading the books, and these, as I indicated, they are called as the manuscripts. And since they are written by hand, so they it comes from a Latin word called as manu. So this is a Latin word. So this manu means hand. They were usually using a palm leaf. So they were using a palm leaf to write. So and over the years, the many manuscripts were eaten by the insects, and some manuscripts were destroyed also, and some of the some manuscripts were survived. And the lives of these kings, the medicines, the science, some epics, some poems and plays were all written. Usually they used the Sanskrit language over here, and they and others were in Tamil. We can also study about these inscriptions, where if these inscriptions are nothing but they were written relatively in the hard surfaces like this. Okay, so on the stones, such, or it can be on a metal. Okay, stone or metal. So what they were usually writing over here, or these basically we call it as inscriptions. So this we also study the inscriptions. So what they were writing on this hard surfaces, so they were what they did, what the kings did, what they want to record some important terms like some victories in the battles. Okay, they were noting about the victories in battles. So then in old inscription, so basically these inscriptions are more than 2000 or 3000 years ago, they were using this kind of inscriptions. So these are called as inscriptions. So one term we should remember is inscription. And I think this inscription which is now taken is from Afghanistan. And the scripts consist of various letters and signs, what they have used in their own way of writing. And who are going to study these objects, we call them as archaeologists. So they are going to study the remains of the buildings. It is made of the stones and bricks. So these objects may be made of stone, or sometimes they are made of bones also. Okay, so this can be or bones also, and sometimes clay. They are writing on the clay also. So these objects which are made of hard substances, usually they are remaining for a longer time. And another important archaeology we can consider is the pots and coins, where pots from the old cities they were used around 4,700 years ago, and these are the silver coins. Okay. So these silver coins were used around 2,500 years ago. These archaeologists also took the bones of the animals, bones of the birds and fishes, to find out the people what people ate. They will consider the plant remains. And these historians and scholars who study this past often use the term called as source. They use the term called as the source. So the source will refer to the information what they found from the manuscripts. So once the sources are found, the learning about the past becomes an adventure, and we can reconstruct the past bit by bit. Right? So if you consider the some islands like Andaman Islands, they depend on the fishing, hunting, and collecting the forest produce. And as we live in cities, we depend on other supplies of food. So these kind of differences were there in the past also. So they kept record of all these victories, what they have got, and what they ate, and some fishing folks and farmers, or they keep records of what they did also. So if you consider the dates, what does this dates mean? We know that we have got day, month, and year. So this is all about 2000 years onwards, right? So this 2000 year is after the birth of Christ. So if you consider this 2000 is after birth of Christ. Uh, Here we have got before Christ also, before this 2000 years. We have got before Christ, we call it as a BC. So BC called as before Christ, and AD is from the year 1. So AD means it's Anno Domini, ANNO DOMINI. So it means a year of the Lord, that is a Christ. So if I consider 2022, so it is 2022 AD. So uh, so when we have seen these inscriptions, they are inscribed on the hard surfaces. So this process, or the scholars understand what it is being inscribed, and this can be done through some process we call it as a decipherment. So this process we call it as decipherment. Okay. Many of these were inscribed several hundreds of years ago, and these inscriptions will contain some scripts and languages. So there are languages which were used, and they were having some scripts also. And one of the famous stories of the decipherment, it came from Egypt. So the kings and queens were about 5,000 years ago. They were using this in northern Africa. For example, in this we can see for a lion, they have used a term called as yell. For birds, they have used yay. So this is about the chapter number 1, where we have to consider some basics like what is around Narmada Valley, what is the meaning of Magadha, what are the hills for there, if you consider Ganga in the Ganga Valley, what comes, what is the early agriculture, what is the cities which are present about 2500 years ago, what is the meaning of hunting and gathering, okay, which was the kingdoms at that time. So they are all to be noted in this chapter 1. That is what, where, how, and when. So thank you for joining. Please like and subscribe this video. I will be posting the next chapter soon. Thank you all for joining.